What would you do if your deepest, most intimate secret was caught on camera? The kind of secret that could destroy your life, your marriage, and everything you thought you knew about yourself? A moment so raw, so unthinkable, that no amount of pretending could erase it. And yet, there it was, captured, preserved, and impossible to deny. This is the story I never thought I'd tell. I used to think we had the perfect life, a beautiful home nestled on acres of land, a place where the sunsets painted the skies in gold and orange hues. It was the kind of place people envied, a sanctuary we built together. My husband, with his easy smile and strong hands, seemed like the perfect partner. We laughed often, shared inside jokes, and worked side by side caring for our ranch animals, including our beloved horse. On the surface, everything seemed picture perfect. I told myself we were living the dream. But there were moments, quiet ones, that I tried not to dwell on. Like the way his laughter sometimes felt forced, or how he'd brush off questions with a quick kiss and change the subject. There were his subtle shifts in behavior too, spending more time outside, disappearing into the stables late at night, and a growing distance between us. At first, I thought it was just the stress of running the ranch or a rough patch. Everyone has them, right? But then, there were the comments, little remarks that made me pause. "You don't understand how much pressure I'm under," he'd say with a sigh, or "I just need you to trust me on this." They felt innocent enough, but they lingered in my mind, gnawing at the edges of my peace. Still, I pushed those feelings aside. Love, I thought, was about compromise. About patience. I convinced myself that things would go back to the way they used to be, that it was all in my head, and then came the day when everything unraveled. A day that started so ordinarily, I never saw the storm brewing. But what happened next would force me to confront the cracks I'd been ignoring, and what I discovered would change everything I thought I knew about him, and myself. It all started so subtly, I barely noticed it. At first, it was just little comments, ones I didn't think twice about. "You're so predictable," he'd chuckle during dinner, or "You need to stop overthinking everything," he'd say when I hesitated about something small. I thought they were harmless observations, nothing more than playful teasing, but then the comments began to shift. "You never take risks," he'd say with a hint of disappointment in his voice. Or, "I wish you'd trust me more." He'd say it casually, like it wasn't a big deal, but there was something in the way he looked at me, waiting for my reaction, that left me feeling uneasy. The suggestions followed soon after. They always came up when we were alone, away from the noise of the ranch. "What if we tried something new?" he'd say while brushing down the horse, his voice light, almost playful. "You're always so safe. Don't you ever feel like breaking out of your comfort zone?" I'd laugh nervously, unsure of what he meant, and he'd quickly change the subject, leaving me wondering if I was being overly sensitive. But those suggestions didn't stop. They became more frequent, more pointed. "If you really trusted me, you wouldn't think twice," he said one evening while we were watching the sunset. I remember how his words hung in the air, heavy, almost accusing, but I didn't dare challenge him. There were also small moments that didn't feel quite right but were easy to dismiss. Like when he'd insist on staying out in the stables late at night and call me to join him. He'd smile as I approached, saying, "You know, this could be our little secret," as if he was sharing something special with me. It made me feel important, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the uneasiness that settled in my stomach. Then came the night that stood out more than any other. He had been quiet all evening, unusually so, and when I asked him what was wrong, he turned to me and said, "Do you trust me?" His tone was calm, but his eyes were fixed on mine, intense and unblinking. I hesitated, not because I didn't trust him, but because the question felt so loaded, so out of place. When I finally nodded, he smiled, a slow, almost satisfied smile, and said, "Good. That's all I needed to know." At that moment, something shifted. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had crossed an invisible line. Looking back, I know now those moments weren't just random. They were calculated, deliberate steps to test my boundaries, to see how far I would let him push. And the worst part? I didn't even realize it until it was too late. That day, he approached me with a kind of energy I hadn't seen in a while. It wasn't anger or frustration, but excitement. He had this glint in his eye, a mixture of eagerness and determination, and it immediately put me on edge. "We should make a video," he said suddenly, breaking the silence while we stood near the stables. "A video?" I asked, confused. "Yeah," he said, leaning casually against the stall door. "Something fun. Something different. With the horse." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. "The horse?" I repeated, trying to mask the uneasiness creeping into my voice. He chuckled, as if my confusion was amusing. "Why not?" he said, his tone light. "It's just an idea, something creative, just for us. No one else needs to know." I wanted to laugh it off, to shake my head and walk away. But his tone, though playful, carried a weight that kept me rooted in place. I could feel my chest tighten, that instinctive alarm that told me this wasn't as harmless as he was trying to make it sound. "What kind of video are you even talking about?" I asked, my voice faltering slightly. He shrugged, still smiling. "Nothing crazy," he said. "Just something we can keep between us. Think of it like a bonding experience." A bonding experience. The way he said it made my stomach churn. It was the kind of phrase that sounded innocent enough on the surface, but carried a deeper, unspoken meaning. I tried to deflect. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, forcing a small laugh. "I mean, what would we even do?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his gaze locking onto mine. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. That question again. The one he'd been using more and more lately, always at just the right moment to disarm me. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. "Of course I trust you," I said, though the words felt hollow as they left my lips. "Then trust me on this," he said, his smile widening. "It'll be fun. You'll see." I looked away, hoping to find something, anything, that could anchor me in the rising tide of uncertainty I felt. But his words lingered, wrapping around me like a trap I couldn't escape. "I don't know," I said weakly, my voice barely above a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, his expression softening as if he could sense my hesitation. "I'm not asking for much," he said. "Just think about it. That's all." His words were gentle, his tone calm, but there was an edge to them that made it clear this wasn't really a request. It was an expectation, a test. And I already knew what would happen if I didn't agree. So, I nodded, just a small, reluctant nod, and he smiled, that slow, satisfied smile that made my skin crawl. "Good," he said simply. That's all I needed to hear. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just a harmless suggestion. It was something else entirely, something I wasn't ready to face. And yet, I had just agreed to it. It all felt surreal as the camera was set up in the corner of the barn, its red light blinking ominously. I stood there, frozen, as he adjusted the angles, his movements calm and deliberate. He was in control, and he knew it. "Just relax," he said without looking at me, his tone light but with an undercurrent of authority that made my chest tighten. "It's just us. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to worry about." The words echoed in my mind, clashing with the alarm bells ringing inside me. My hands trembled slightly, and I clutched them together, hoping he wouldn't notice. "Are you ready?" he asked, finally turning to face me. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. My throat felt dry, my heart pounding so loudly I thought he might hear it. Instead, I nodded faintly, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me. He smiled, that same confident, knowing smile he always wore when he knew he'd won. "Good," he said simply. The horse stood quietly in its stall, oblivious to the tension that hung in the air. I glanced at it, desperate for some kind of distraction, but it only made the situation feel more surreal. "Come here," he said, gesturing me closer. I hesitated, every instinct in me screaming to run, to refuse, to do anything but move forward. But I couldn't. The weight of his expectation, the unspoken threat of what might happen if I said no, kept me rooted in place. As I took slow, reluctant steps toward him, the pit in my stomach grew. Each movement felt like crossing a line I could never uncross, a step deeper into something I couldn't escape. See? It's not so bad, he said softly, his hand reaching out to guide me. I flinched slightly at his touch, but forced myself to stay still. My mind raced with thoughts of how I'd gotten here, how I'd let things get this far. The camera beeped, signaling that it was recording. I felt the heat rise to my face, shame and fear twisting together in my chest. He moved with ease, directing me with calm precision. I followed his instructions, each one feeling heavier than the last. My movements were mechanical, my mind detached, as though watching someone else go through the motions, and then it happened, the act he had been building toward, the moment I had dreaded but couldn't fully comprehend until it was too late. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls of the barn pressing down like a vice. My chest tightened, and my breathing became shallow as I did what he asked, my body moving as if on autopilot. But the worst part wasn't the act itself. It was the way he looked at me when it was over, the satisfaction in his eyes, the triumphant curve of his lips. You did great, he said, his voice warm and reassuring, as though he'd just congratulated me on something innocent. I stood there, unable to meet his gaze, my whole body trembling. I wanted to scream, to run, to undo everything that had just happened. But I couldn't move. In that moment, I realized he had me exactly where he wanted me. And I had no idea how to escape. I thought it was over when the camera stopped rolling. I thought I could put it behind me, lock it away, and never think about it again. But I was wrong. So wrong. That video wasn't just for us. At least, that's what he'd said. But now it was more than a memory, it was a weapon. One he wielded with precision. It started subtly at first. A casual mention, a reminder. You wouldn't want anyone to see this, would you? He'd say, his tone light, almost playful, as though it was a joke. But the weight of his words crushed me every time. I became a shadow of myself. Every time my phone buzzed, a cold dread washed over me, the possibility that it was him, a new demand, a new reminder of what he held over me. One night, I sat alone in the dark, staring at the footage on my phone. I'd begged him to delete it, pleaded with every ounce of desperation I had. But instead, he'd sent me a copy, just to remind me of the power he had over me. My hands shook as I replayed it, the image burned into my mind no matter how much I wanted to forget. My reflection stared back at me from the screen, a face I barely recognized, drained, defeated, and drowning in guilt. I stopped seeing my friends. I stopped answering calls. I stopped being me. Every choice, every move I made, felt dictated by him, by the knowledge that at any moment, he could ruin everything. The walls of the house I once called home seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. The life I thought I had, the love I believed was real, it was all gone, replaced by something darker, something suffocating. The worst part? I couldn't see a way out. Everywhere I turned, there he was, watching, waiting, and reminding me that as long as that video existed, so did his control. And in those quiet, sleepless nights, I began to wonder if I'd ever truly been free. Or if this had been his plan all along. But that's not the end of the story. What happened next would change everything. My marriage, my dignity, everything I thought I knew about myself, was about to be tested in a way I never imagined. As I stood there, staring at the man I once loved, a new fire began to burn inside me. It wasn't just the rage. It was something deeper, something raw, my breaking point. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, something unexpected happened. If you've been moved by this story, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell icon, and leave a like. Your support means everything. If you've ever faced a similar situation or have thoughts to share, don't hesitate to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and start a conversation. Thanks for watching. If this story resonated with you, make sure to check out some of my other videos. You won't want to miss them.